Don't go to the office today. Go home. Lock your door. Don't call anyone. You'll know why soon enough. She said it like she was reading off a grocery list. Flat certain. Like she already knew the ending of a story I hadn't even started living yet. My name is Ravenna Cole. I'm 31 years old. I work as a forensic accountant for a mid-size firm in downtown Vancouver, and I say that because it matters later. I find the numbers people try to hide. I trace money through shell companies and falsified ledgers and offshore transfers designed to look like nothing. That's what I do. I'm good at it. I don't believe in signs. I don't believe in premonitions. I believe in paper trails. So when an elderly woman stopped me outside the SkyTrain entrance on Burrard Street on a gray Tuesday morning in November, pressed my dropped transit card back into my hand, and said those words to me in a voice like gravel and smoke, I almost kept walking. Almost. She was small. Indigenous, I think, with silver hair pulled back and eyes that didn't quite match the rest of her face. They were too alert. Too still. Like she was watching something behind me that I couldn't see. I said thank you for the card. I smiled the way you smile at strangers. I took one step toward the turnstile, and then I stopped. I don't know what it was, the way she didn't move, didn't blink, didn't look away, the way she hadn't phrased it as a question or a suggestion. She hadn't said maybe you should go home or have you considered. She said, go home, lock your door, like it was already decided. I told myself I had a migraine starting. I told myself I'd been meaning to take a personal day for weeks. I told myself a lot of things in those 30 seconds. I didn't get on the train. I walked back to my car in the parkade, sat in the driver's seat for a full minute staring at the concrete wall in front of me, and then I drove home to the condo my fiancé and I shared in Kitsilano. My fiancé. I should explain him. His name is Marcus. No, wait, I'm going to call him what he was to me then. My fiancé. Because I think by the end of this you'll understand why I can't say his name the same way anymore. We'd been together for 4 years. Engaged for 11 months. The wedding was set for the following June, a small ceremony at a vineyard in the Okanagan, 32 guests. My mother's hydrangeas woven into the arch we'd picked out together at a Sunday market in Granville Island. I had the seating chart saved to my desktop. I had a dress I loved hanging in a garment bag in the back of our closet. He was a commercial real estate developer. Charismatic, well-dressed, the kind of person who made waitstaff feel genuinely seasoned, made his colleagues feel vaguely uneasy. I'd always told myself that second thing was just ambition. I let myself into the condo at 9:14 in the morning. The place was quiet. He'd left for work at 7:30. I remembered him kissing me on the forehead, grabbing his travel mug, saying he had back-to-backs all day. The condo smelled like his coffee and the cedar candle I kept on the kitchen counter. I set my bag down. I kicked off my shoes. I stood in the hallway and felt the particular silence of a home that should be empty. And I thought, what am I doing here? I almost left. I was genuinely embarrassed by myself. Forensic accountant skips work because an old woman at a train station gave her a feeling. My colleagues would have loved that. Then I heard the elevator in our building stops on our floor. We were the only unit on that floor. It was one of the selling points. Corner suite, private elevator landing. I'd thought it was romantic when we signed the lease. Now I stood in my own hallway in my socked feet and listened to the elevator open and my front door unlock, not knock, unlock. My fiancé's key, his copy, turning in the deadbolt I had just locked behind me. I moved without thinking. The closet in the front hall, coats, an umbrella stand, the vacuum I was always meaning to find a better spot for. I pulled the door shut behind me and stood very still in the dark with someone else's winter jacket pressed against my face. Footsteps. 2 sets. His, I knew. That particular unhurried stride, never rushed, always in control. The other set was lighter, quicker. A woman who knew where she was going. They didn't call out. They didn't announce themselves. You don't announce yourself in a place you've already decided belongs to you. I heard the kitchen, the refrigerator opening. His voice, low and easy. I ordered from that place on 4th, Should be here by noon. A woman's laugh, comfortable, not the laugh of someone in an unfamiliar space. My stomach dropped through the floor. I know what you're thinking. I thought it too. An affair. Devastating, yes. Humiliating, absolutely. But I'd been in that closet for approximately 40 seconds and I was already rationalizing it. We'd sort this out. We'd go to counseling. People make mistakes. 4 years means something. I held on to that thought for about 3 more minutes. Until I heard him say, the financial advisor called again. He wants the joint account fully consolidated before the wedding date. Silence from her. Tell him it needs to be done by the 15th, he continued. Once she signs the amendment to the trust, the timeline works. You're sure she'll sign it? His laugh. And I want you to understand something about that laugh. It was the exact same laugh he'd used when I worried out loud about things. Gentle. A little indulgent. The laugh that said, you're overthinking this, sweetheart. She signs everything I put in front of her, he said. She trusts me. That's the whole point. I stopped breathing. I want to be honest about what happened in my body in that moment because I think people romanticize it. They make it sound like clarity, like a door swinging open. What it actually felt like was a system failure, like every process running in the background of my life suddenly threw an error at the same time and I had to stand in a dark closet and wait for the reboot. The amendment to the trust. My trust. My grandmother's trust, set up when she died 6 years ago, naming me as sole beneficiary until marriage, at which point it converted to a joint marital asset. A clause my grandmother's lawyer had put in for reasons that had seemed old-fashioned at the time, and now seemed like a trap I'd walked directly into. My fiancé knew about that trust. He'd known about it for 2 years. He'd been the one to suggest we speak to a financial planner about how to integrate it into our future. He'd sat across from that planner at a glass table in an office on Howe Street and nodded earnestly while I asked questions. I'd thought he was being responsible. The amendment. I was still standing there, processing. He'd mentioned it to me once 2 weeks ago, framed it as a tax efficiency thing. Something about restructuring before the calendar year closed. He'd slid a folder across the kitchen counter and said our planner had recommended it. I'd looked at it for about 90 seconds between answering work emails and said I'd read it properly over the weekend. I had not read it properly over the weekend. I heard her say, "What about after?" When she realizes. Long pause. By the time she realizes, he said, it'll be fully executed. Joint assets in a marriage are complicated to unwind, especially if one party disputes the timeline. She'll dispute it. She'll try. Another pause, but she's not going to have access to the documentation she'd need. I've been managing that file from my email. She doesn't even know which brokerage. There is a particular kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. I'd felt it once before, during a case at work, when I'd been tracing a series of withdrawals and suddenly understood the complete shape of what someone had done. Not just the action, but the planning, the patience, the sustained deliberate effort over months and years. The cold of realizing someone built a structure specifically designed to bury you. I was standing inside that structure. 4 years. He had spent 4 years building toward this. Or maybe not 4 years. Maybe he'd identified the trust early, done the math, and decided the return was worth the timeline. I didn't know which was worse. I heard them move toward the living room, the couch. The particular sound of my throw cushions being rearranged. I heard him say, lightly, like he was commenting on the weather, I'm thinking Tulum for after 3 weeks. Before everything gets complicated with lawyers. You've booked it? Deposits down. Her name's on the reservation. A beat. Seemed smart. The calculated detail of that. My name on a vacation booking for a trip he planned to take with someone else with my money while I untangled the legal wreckage of a marriage I hadn't even finished planning. The sheer architectural precision of it. Here is what I am not going to tell you I did next. I am not going to tell you I had a moment of grace. I am not going to tell you I felt sad in any clean, narrative way. What I felt was the thing that happens in my brain when I've been given a complex fraud case and I have a full data set, and 12 uninterrupted hours. I felt it click into gear. They thought I was on the SkyTrain. They thought I was sitting at my desk on the 14th floor, answering emails, completely unaware. Good. I had my phone. I opened the voice memo app first, running it through the door crack, volume maxed, not ideal audio quality, but enough. Then, carefully, slowly, 1 millimeter at a time, I used my phone camera through the gap. Not much. A slice. Enough to put 2 people in my living room on a Tuesday morning when both of them were supposed to be somewhere else entirely. I sent everything to a cloud folder. Not the shared one we used for travel documents and grocery lists. The one I'd set up 4 years ago on my personal account, the one I'd originally used to back up old case files. He'd actually teased me about it once. You keep copies of copies, you know that? And I'd said that's literally my job, and we'd both laughed. I wasn't laughing now. But I was close. When I heard the conversation shift, quieter, more personal, the kind of conversation that was about to move into another room, I counted to 60. Then I slipped out of the closet, lifted my bag from the hallway floor 1 inch at a time, and walked out the front door in my socked feet. I pulled the door shut until I heard the latch catch, not the deadbolt, nothing that would click. In the elevator, I put my shoes back on. My hands were steady. I noted that specifically the way you note data points. Hands steady, heart rate elevated but controlled. I rode down to the lobby, nodded at the concierge, and walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for 11 minutes. Then I started working. The first thing I did was call my grandmother's estate lawyer. Not the planner my fiancé had introduced me to. My lawyer, the one who had set up the original trust, whose business card had been sitting in my filing cabinet for 6 years. I got his assistant. I said it was urgent and personal, and that I needed a consultation today. She called back in 20 minutes and fit me in at 4. The second thing I did was log into the brokerage he didn't know I knew about. I know because I am a forensic accountant, and finding things people don't want found is precisely my skill set. And when my fiancé started managing the file on my trust 2 years ago, I quietly made sure I had independent access at every level. Not because I suspected anything, because that's how I'm built. No unauthorized transfers had cleared yet. The amendment he'd mentioned, I could now see exactly what it was. A restructuring of beneficial interests that would, upon execution, redirect the principal to a joint account he controlled as primary signatory. It was actually quite elegant if you weren't the person being redirected. I flagged it internally. Pending investigation, unauthorized amendment attempt. Then I emailed a colleague at work, someone I trusted, someone discreet, and asked her to hold a conflict of interest review flag on my file. No details yet, just the flag. She responded in 4 minutes with a thumbs up emoji and no questions. That's why I trusted her. At 4 o'clock, I sat across from my grandmother's estate lawyer in his office on West Georgia Street and laid out a timeline of the past 24 months in the precise, documented, evidence-supported way that I lay out fraud cases for clients. He didn't say much. He took notes. At the end he said, "Ravenna, you were not supposed to see this coming. Most people don't," I said. I almost didn't. He filed an emergency injunction on the trust before 6 p.m. All restructuring attempts frozen, pending judicial review, which in British Columbia under these circumstances could take some time to resolve but would absolutely prevent any transfer from clearing in the interim. He also referred me to a family law colleague. I texted my fiancé at 6:47. Stayed home sick. Not feeling well. Probably just tired. 3 dots, almost immediately. Oh no. Want me to pick anything up on the way home? I put my phone face down on the passenger seat and drove to my sister's apartment in East Van. She took one look at me standing in her doorway and said, "What did he do?" I don't have a dramatic answer for that moment. I sat at her kitchen table and I ate the soup she reheated, and I told her the whole thing from the beginning, from the old woman on Burrard Street to the state lawyer's office. She listened without interrupting, which, if you know my sister, is genuinely remarkable. At the end, she said, "The trust." Of course it was the trust. I never liked how much he knew about the trust. I hadn't noticed that she'd noticed. That night, I sat on her couch with my laptop and a list of everything that needed to happen in a specific order. Joint accounts I had access to. Flagged. Life insurance policies we'd taken out together 6 months ago. His suggestion, very responsible, very forward-thinking. I contacted the provider and requested a beneficiary review hold pending potential coercion investigation. Deposit on the Okanagan venue. I confirmed my name was the primary on the contract, which meant I had unilateral cancellation rights under their policy. The Tulum reservation. I found that one too. My name. His credit card. I left it exactly where it was. At 11:23 p.m., I sent a single email to his mother. Subject line, "There's something you should know about June." I attached the audio, just the part where he said she signs everything I put in front of her. That's the whole point. Then I turned my phone off and went to sleep on my sister's pull-out couch, which has a bar in the middle that digs into your back, and I slept better than I had in months. My phone came back on at 7 the next morning and had 39 missed calls. 19 from my fiancé. 6 from his mother. 4 from a number I didn't recognize that turned out, when I looked it up later, to be the financial planner he'd introduced me to. 2 from our wedding venue coordinator, which confused me until I realized he'd probably called the venue trying to understand what I'd done. And 1 from my grandmother's estate lawyer, telling me the injunction had been granted. I listened to 4 of the voicemails. My fiancé's first one was measured, almost professional. The second one was less so. By the third, the careful, controlled quality that had made me trust him for 4 years had come completely apart. He said my name like a question he couldn't answer. He said I didn't understand the full picture. He said we needed to talk in person, rationally like adults. His mother's voicemail was a different kind of thing entirely. She cried. She said she didn't raise him to do this. She said she was so sorry. She said that if I ever wanted to talk, she meant that. I believed her. I still do. He showed up at my sister's building at noon. Somehow he'd figured out where I was. Probably called my mother, who I'd called that morning, who had cried and then gotten very quiet in the way she does when she's decided something. My sister answered the intercom and told him I wasn't available. He buzzed again. She told him that if he kept buzzing, she was going to call the non-emergency police line, which in Vancouver actually gets a response, and that he was welcome to wait on the sidewalk and consider his choices. He left. He came back 2 hours later. This time I went downstairs. I want to be careful about how I describe this because I think there's a version of it that gets told as a big dramatic moment with a satisfying monologue. And that's not what happened. What happened was I opened the glass door of my sister's lobby, and he was standing on the steps looking like someone had removed a structural component from inside him. The confidence, the ease, the particular way he occupied a room, gone. What was left was someone who'd been found out and hadn't yet figured out what to do about it. He started talking immediately. People who are panicking do that. He said I'd misunderstood. He said the conversation I'd heard had been out of context. He said the amendment was a standard document and he'd been about to walk me through it. He said the woman who'd been in our condo was a colleague, a work thing, complicated to explain. He said my trust issues had always been a problem in our relationship and that I was doing the thing I always did, which was catastrophize. I waited for him to stop. Then I said, "The injunction was granted this morning." His mouth closed. "The beneficiary review is pending on both policies," I said. "And I spoke with a family lawyer yesterday afternoon. I know what the amendment would have done." He looked at me for a long moment, and I watched him do something I'd seen him do many times without recognizing it for what it was. Recalculate. Assess the board. Decide on the next move. "You're throwing away 4 years," he said finally. His voice was quieter now, stripped down. "You started throwing them away," I said. "I just noticed before they were gone." He stood there for another few seconds. Then he walked to his car. I stood on the steps in the November cold and watched him go and waited to feel something more complicated than what I felt, which was relief. Simple, Structural relief. Like a load-bearing wall that had been quietly cracking for longer than I'd known had finally been taken out and replaced. I called the Okanagan Vineyard that afternoon and canceled the June date. The coordinator was kind. She said it happened more than people thought. I filed a formal complaint with the Provincial Securities Commission 3 weeks later, once I had the full documentation assembled, which did not take long because I am very good at assembling documentation. The financial planner had his license reviewed. I won't go into the outcome of that, but I'll say that my grandmother's lawyer told me I'd been thorough, and he doesn't say that lightly. The Tulum reservation I left in my name. I took my sister. We spent 11 days in early February, swimming in water so clear you could see the bottom 20 feet down, eating tacos at a beach shack that had no menu, and not talking about him unless we felt like it. My sister is bad at small talk and very good at sitting in comfortable silence. She bought a ceramic bowl at a market on the second day and carried it wrapped in her sweater for the entire trip. That's the detail I remember most clearly when I think about that vacation. Not the ocean or the food or the warm air after a Vancouver winter. My sister, carefully unwrapping a bowl at the end of each day to make sure it hadn't cracked. Some things you carry gently and they make it. Some things you're careful with and they still don't. I think about the old woman sometimes. I've gone back to that SkyTrain entrance on Burrard a dozen times. I've never seen her. I don't know who she was or how she knew or whether she knew anything at all, really. Maybe she said those words to everyone, a daily ritual, a prayer for strangers. Maybe I was just the one who listened. My grandmother's trust fully reverted to my sole name 8 months after the injunction. I sat in my lawyer's office and signed the paperwork, and he slid it across the desk, and I thought about her. My grandmother, who had been a practical woman, unsentimental, who'd set up a trust with a joint asset clause because she'd believed in marriage and wanted to make things easy. I thought about how she would have felt about all of this, and honestly, I think she would have said, "Well, now you know. I think that's right. Now I know." I moved into a one-bedroom in Mount Pleasant last spring. The windows face east, which means I get the morning light, which means I am now, apparently, a person who has opinions about morning light. The building has a garden plot in the back, and I've been growing tomatoes with mixed results. The tomatoes are beside the point. The point is the garden is mine, and the morning is mine, and I decide what happens in it. Some days on my way to work, I take the SkyTrain. I always look for her at that entrance. I don't know what I'd say if I saw her. Thank you seems too small, but I think she'd understand. I think she already knew.